Hi everyone, and welcome to our latest how-to webinar. I'm delighted to say we're here with Sarah Bradley today, and I'll hand it over to Sarah in a minute to introduce herself and obviously take over. But today we're going to look at effectively managing employees as we come out of, well, I suppose at the moment and beyond lockdown, as well as things changing. It's obviously such a changing dynamic at the moment is the working world, and it's going to be something that's going to be a really interesting test for a lot of businesses and a lot of individuals as well. So Sarah's going to take us all through that. Hopefully not we use the word furlough too many times. So it's a word we've heard a lot in the last year or so, but yeah, so what I'll say to anyone watching this, we've got the chat box, we've got the Q&A box as well. And if you've got any questions specifically, Sarah, I know, is more than happy to kind of answer those, or just generally about what's been said. Please, please do get involved. More than happy to do so. I also know that a lot of people watch this kind of on demand as well, a bit later. And again, I'm sure Sarah will be happy to kind of answer any questions later down the line if you need to do so. So I'll finish talking and hand it over to you, Sarah. And if you want to kind of introduce yourself on the webinar, and like I said, we can go from there.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks very much. I have prepared some slides and I've prepared some thoughts in advance, but really I'm really keen on anybody popping any questions in the chat box if you are watching live, and just really using this as an opportunity to ask questions that are on your mind. So my collection of slides and questions are based on the things that my clients have been asking me. But if there's anything else out there that people want to know, then please do speak up. So I'm just going to try and share the slides now and just make sure that this works okay. We see that okay, Michael? Thumbs up.
Perfect, Sarah. Yep, perfect to see that.
So managing employees beyond lockdown, and we've got a couple of situations that'll be at play here. We've probably got some employees that have been working at home for quite a long time, or maybe on an intermittent basis. We've also got some employees that have been on furlough, and we've got changing businesses. So there's lots of questions about the direction of business and whether everything's exactly as we want it to be with our employees. So what I'm going to look at today, my computer's just playing up with me. We're going to look at the extension of furlough. And yes, Michael, I'm absolutely fed up with the word. I can't wait to ban it from my vocabulary. So it will be brief, but just touching on this point for everybody. We're just going to talk a little bit about returning to the office. And as I've already said, that might be because we're returning because of the end of furlough, or returning because of people have been working at home. But comes with that, we get lots of requests for permanent home working, and how are we going to handle those? Is it right for the business? Is it right for the individual? So we're just going to touch on aspects of health and safety and well-being a lot in respect of returning from furlough or working at home as well. And then just touch briefly on, if we are thinking about redundancies, just a heads up of some of the things that people need to think about. The extension of furlough. So furlough has been extended to the end of September 2021. Up until the 30th of June, it's 80% government funding. But as businesses start to reopen, and employers will start to contribute more. So that's 10% in July, 20% in August, 20% in September. What's important for furlough, some of the things that have always applied, is that an agreement should be in writing with your employees before any period of furlough starts. So if we're thinking about people on full furlough or flexible furlough, that needs to be in writing. One of the things that people may or not realise is that there was a change in the furlough guidance, and if we are thinking about giving anybody notice to end their employment, you can't serve this concurrently with furlough. So if somebody's on furlough, they have to be brought back onto full payroll for the notice period. Staff can continue to take holidays during furlough. So really highly recommend, if you have got people out there on furlough and you're thinking about reopening, that you are asking some holidays to be taken so that we can effectively manage that period of absence in the business. When somebody is on furlough, we top up to 100%. Now, one of the most recent changes are people that have been written to by the NHS and described as clinically extremely vulnerable. We have been able to claim furlough payments for those individuals, but they're going to be written to and advised that shielding will stop from the 1st of April. And with that, furlough will no longer be available to these individuals. So they're the bits on extended furlough. Michael, are there any questions in the chat box on furlough at this moment?
So we don't have a question specifically about furlough, but we have had a question if you want to take that now, and we can
Yeah, let's see
if
what
you
it is.
mentioned it. So Andy's asked about, his business. He doesn't have full-time employees per se, but the people who work for him are self-employed subcontractors. So is there any kind of specific advice around bringing them back, specifically, I guess, around when they start delivering on site? Because obviously there's the element of the physical presence now that's going to be some people might be, I guess, reluctant to do.
Yeah, so I'm going to touch on that a little bit on the health and safety side of things. I mean, with the subcontractors and it's site work, they'll have an obligation to follow the site guidance. So I think as a business owner, it'd be due diligence to make sure that the sites that you're asking subcontractors and employees to work on, that they've carried out their COVID risk assessments. So every business, regardless of size or site and industry, should be carrying out COVID risk assessments to make sure that we're adhering to COVID safe workplaces. So I'll carry on a little bit and we'll probably touch a little bit more on health and safety as we go through. So here we go, health and safety there. So employees returning from furlough or from working at home, there are going to be issues around health and safety, HR and employee wellbeing. So from a health and safety, I've kind of just answered that in advance, thanks to Andy. So COVID risk assessments. This is, there's lots of information on the government websites, there's lots of information on the HSE websites. So I'm not a health and safety specialist, one of those usual HR sit on the fence defences. However, I've been around the health and safety world a while as well, and it's not rocket science. A lot of it's practical common sense. So I have a client with a keypad entry, and we were suggesting to that client that they have definitely hand sanitizers on the outside ahead of people using the keypad entry. So if you just think logically, you'll probably get there. And all it has to be is a COVID risk assessment just simply means a collection of your logical thoughts about people coming back to work and what practices you've put into place. But there are lots of guidance available on the government website and the HSE website as well. So in terms of HR, we need to be thinking about whether we've got the right shift pattern for return. So some industries have opened up a bit slower, work's still been a little bit different, not quite back to full speed yet. So do we need to be speaking to staff about asking them to take some part-time work, some different shift work, some flexible furlough? So this is all in the planning stage to make sure that we're having these conversations with employees. Now, we can't enforce these kind of changes. Most ordinarily, we can't enforce them at all because of the period of time that we've had and because of furlough and because of COVID. There's some flexibility for us to be able to explain why these changes are more necessary at this time. But that's probably only going to be on a temporary basis. So there's going to be a lot of planning and communication with employees. And in terms of wellbeing, I'm going to touch on later on our four C's for wellbeing to make sure that we keep things in check. So common questions you're going to get: COVID makes me anxious. I don't feel safe on public transport. The work is too much. I don't feel like coming in. What happens if I'm pregnant or on maternity leave? And another common question I've had is my team can't work from home, so what do I do? So starting with COVID makes me anxious. This can be genuine, really, really genuine for some people. And there isn't a black and white one size fits all answer. In each of these questions here, my answer is going to be speak to the individual, find out what the individual issue is for that individual person, and try and work up a resolution. Try and make the anxiety go away by making sure that you have done your COVID risk assessments and you're communicating those with employees. Don't be dismissive of people being anxious. COVID is actually somewhat protected under health and safety legislation. So if your employees make complaints about the health and safety standards of your workplace, this is actually protected then in employment law. So you've got to bear that in mind. So we need to be listening, understanding and explaining. And there's going to be lots of valid reasons why you can move through that anxiety stage and kind of eventually say to employees, look, at the end of the day, we are working in the office and I do need you back at work, and these are all the reasons why. And as long as they're set down and they make sense, then you'll have a valid argument. It may mean, because of the level of anxiety, that some people have to stay on a period of unpaid leave for a short time. and that's one of the acceptable outcomes. So how about my team can't work from home, what do I do? If the team really can't work from home, again, it's that COVID safe risk assessment, maybe have limited staff coming in at different times, measures in the workplace. How about there's too much work coming in? Again, sit down, speak to the individual, work out what the issue is. I don't feel safe on public transport. Are there any other ways that the individual can come to work? Could we make them feel safer by letting them start later if public transport's maybe a little bit less busy, or earlier if public transport's a little bit less busy? Could we help them with cycling to work or walking to work? Can we help them for a short period of time with some contribution to taxi fares? So these are all options for us to consider. And again, can we keep working at home flexible for a little bit longer? It's just about explaining and helping people understand what the business has done to make things safe. The pregnancy and maternity leave. So furlough payments can continue while somebody is pregnant ahead of maternity leave, but once the maternity leave starts, then that normal maternity pay period must commence, and employers must give us 8 weeks notice that they want to start their maternity leave early. I touched on already, what if somebody says, well, I've been working at home for all this last year, I want to stay working at home, why do I have to come back to the office? So this is actually covered under a statutory legislation as well. So employees with more than 26 weeks continuous service have a statutory right to make a flexible working request. That request can include changing hours, a change in the time they work, a change in the place they work, i.e. to work at home. It can include a different pattern of work or job sharing. So flexible working, when I say a statutory right, anything that's a statutory right gives people protection in employment law. So it means they fall into what we call protected categories because they've asserted a statutory right. So it's something that you do have to take seriously. And requests for flexible working, we would hold a meeting, we would discuss what the employee is asking for, understand how it might work for them, how it might work for the business. But here are the reasons we might refuse a flexible working request. So these are bullet points: burden of additional costs, detrimental effect on meeting customer demand, inability to reorganise work, inability to recruit, detrimental impact on quality, lack of work during the period, planned or structural changes. We should note that I think people might miss out on discussions with colleagues around the coffee machine isn't a valid reason to refuse a flexible working request. So these are the reasons listed down in the legislation. They're not just fancy things that I've made up for today's presentation. So we have to take it seriously, and we can only refuse them for certain reasons. So do make sure that we're following the full process. If we followed the full process and we've refused for a legitimate reason, the employee cannot make another claim for 12 months. Michael, have I got any questions at the moment as we're just going through here?
Yeah, well, I had a question about this actually. How important is it that, so whether it's the business owner or the manager, when you consider both, I guess, flexible working and anything related to COVID, is that they don't, I guess, make their own feelings big part of the decision making? So whether you are not bothered by COVID or you are extremely bothered by COVID, I guess there's two ends to that. And same with the flexible working, whether you think it's brilliant or not. How important is that you kind of take that, I guess, your personal opinion out of it and make it factual, I guess?
It's very important because, as I've just said, a lot of clients I've helped will be saying things to me like, but the office won't feel the same, and the culture won't feel the same, and the atmosphere won't feel the same. And I like to be able to see them, and I like to be able to know what they're doing on a daily basis. And none of those things are valid reasons in legislation for refusing that request. So it's about taking a big leap of faith and really thinking about how to manage this positively. Now, the thing that I will say is I've also had a lot of feedback from clients that there's been a lot of acceptance of a change of working during COVID that's not probably manageable for the long term. So there's been a tolerance of flexibility and agility, especially around childcare. that we need to strike a balance back between what we can accept as a business and what the employee needs to be able to manage that balance. We've definitely, all of my clients have definitely offered an increased level of flexibility that could impact on productivity and business performance going forward. So we're back to the time now of saying, okay, that working at home during COVID looked like this, but what does working at home perhaps look like going forward? And I think there will be a slight variation, an increase in expectation as we start to move back to some level of that horrible word, new normal or normality. So yeah, flexible working requests can't be confused with how we feel about the way we want to manage people or the way we want to manage our working day. It's got to be very balanced around the individual and legislation.
Absolutely, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. So again, touching on working from home, when I said that it's been slightly different during COVID, I've always kind of felt a bit like health and safety's at the advice of the government, and in a justifiable balancing act, we've taken a kind of different approach. So moving forward, for somebody to be based permanently working at home, they must have a safe health and safety environment. So long-term working at home isn't working at the dining room table. It isn't working at the sofa, which for many, many reasons in the UK and across the globe, we've accepted a slightly varied working at home kind of structure. And we must now put some emphasis back on that responsibility of both the employee and the employer around managing health and safety. So for a permanent home working request, have they got an adequate home working environment? And there's no obligation for the employer to suddenly buy expensive working at home equipment. Some employers are quite happy to do this. Some employers can't afford to do this for every single employee. And it's a case of the employee making sure that they've provided themselves with a safe environment. So for permanent home working, managing remotely, we really need to be putting some emphasis back on long-term health and safety. Otherwise, it will start to have a detrimental effect. HR again, so consider whether contracts of employment need updating. Keep an eye on our company culture. I'm going to touch on 4Cs in a moment. And really think about how new hires will be inducted and trained. I know that's something that Michael's just experienced, and you've had a bit of a hybrid approach. I don't know if you want to just interject there, Michael, and let us understand what your experience has been like with that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's I mean, it's not perfect, I guess, but you know, it is actually the way we'll be working as we move forward anyway, is that kind of flexible option of both being in the office and working remotely. So kind of starting as a mean to go on, I guess, to an extent with what we're doing. So that's not been too bad. Obviously, you do miss out on that for someone new starting, that kind of being around a number of people and kind of picking up learning almost accidentally that I'm sure most people have experienced previously. So you do miss out on that. But, you know, the technology we've got has enabled us to make the best of it, I guess, best we possibly could.
Yeah. It's just about the planning, isn't it? And making sure that you've kind of thought through how to do this in advance. And then that HR question, can employees work anywhere in the world? So this is an increasing question. My employee's got an apartment in Portugal, Spain, wherever. Can they go and work there? Well, as soon as somebody works outside of the UK, they can actually then fall into the employment legislation that's within that country. So you need to be very careful about the amount of time somebody spends working outside of the UK for a UK company, because you then need to start to get solicitors that specialise in that legislation for that country. There's also tax implications, and again, I'm not a tax advisor, but you must speak to your accountant if this is a question that somebody's asked you and you're thinking about considering it. So there are many roles now where we feel like we can work anywhere in the world, but from a business perspective, think about the impact for you from a compliance respect in terms of accountancy and employment law. The rules change as soon as the person leaves the country.
I would imagine there's potential visa things around that as well. You know, when the people go abroad for wherever they go in, there's potential places where they need a working visa to be technically working. I would imagine anyway. There
will be, but if they're not working for that for a company in that country, maybe the rules are different. And again, a whole new piece of legislation that's got nothing to do with UK employment law. Quite honestly, it's a minefield I don't think I'd want to get into myself, but it will work for some people. It will work for some people. Employee wellbeing. So I'm just going to flip straight onto our 4 C's that we've developed. So in terms of managing employee wellbeing, again, I use this phrase, it's not rocket science, but we've split it into 4 little memorable areas here of communication, connection, care and consideration. So have regular virtual face-to-face meetings if people are working from home. Michael's already touched on technology, so there's loads of technology now that will help us collaborate, from group chat platforms and apps, etc. Encourage employees to form local virtual support groups. So we're soon going to be able to meet to walk in the park again. Encourage this for our employees. In terms of connection, don't make all of our interactions transactional. So it shouldn't be all about performance appraisal and management. Let's make sure that we've got some engagement interactions as well that are outside of there. And consideration, everyone's finding lockdown hard, everybody's finding COVID hard. And there's lots of different reasons for that. So as I said earlier, we've been very considerate, and there's a period of time where that's still got to continue. And then we're looking at care. So look out for signs of stress and anxiety. Are people telling you they're tired? Are they working excessive hours? Are they working erratic hours? Schedule team meetings and touch points, and encourage employees themselves to take walks and regular breaks. Somebody pointed out to me yesterday that if I had an appointment in the past, I would have had a drive either side. And what I've started doing is I've started booking appointments every hour. So literally not giving myself any break. It's probably not, it's not how we would normally work. So mental capacity is increased. And I think this is some of the considerations. We've gained a huge amount of working hours from our employees by the absence of driving. But there was things that took place during that driving, thinking and reflection and some mental planning and a bit of a break. So let's make sure we're still building those activities in there. Any questions at the moment, Michael?
No questions about it. I think that's a great point about that kind of around Zoom and online. I can imagine some professions, especially if you're saying a business development kind of sales role at the moment, there'll be that temptation just to do call after call after call after call. And I'm sure most of us have done that at least the odd time. It's really hard. And I think, making sure that people don't feel like they have to do that. Something I've, tried to build in myself, which isn't always easy, but I think it's really, really important.
Yeah. So redundancy, I said I'd just touch on this just in case, because we talk about managing employees, and this could still be on the horizon, unfortunately, for some companies. So what is a redundancy? Well, redundancy is one of the fair reasons for which we can part company dismiss an employee. But it's got to fall into a particular definition. So a redundancy is valid if there is a closure of the business, if there is a closure of a particular place of work, the workplace. So we maybe close an office, maybe we've got 2 locations and we shut one down, or we relocate and the first one closes. And redundancy is genuine if there's a diminished need for employees to carry out work of a particular kind. So it's quite a mouthful of a definition, but there's got to be a drop in work or a cessation of work or a diminished level of work or a closure of the business or a closure of the workplace in order for redundancy to be genuine. So redundancy would mean that you wouldn't be looking to recruit or replace the individual. Redundancy means that there's genuine change in the required level of number of employees. So that's the first important thing to really remember. And golden rules for redundancy. So if it's fewer than 19 employees that are to be made redundant within a period of time, then there's no formal written legislation or rules on the redundancy consultation process. But it does say we have to consult and that the process must be fair. And so failure to consult or to speak with the individual could result in a claim for unfair dismissal. So consultation simply means having a structured set of meetings, explaining what we're thinking about doing, asking the employee if they've got any ideas for alternatives, and then moving the meeting forward. Sometimes this results in 2 people job sharing, or it results in some people agreeing to go part-time. Unfortunately, sometimes there are no ideas that are raised, and it does result in us continuing to dismiss the person. So that it's really important that redundancy is a dismissal, therefore you must follow kind of a formal meeting at the end as well, so that the person's fully aware of the rights and that they're given the right of appeal as well. So less than 19 employees, no real structured process. So for example, if there are more than 20 employees, there's set time scales over set periods of time. So it's really important to look at how many people you're planning to make redundant and then set the process up accordingly. So what are the alternatives to redundancy? So some things that people might suggest and that you can suggest as a business: temporary layoff. So layoff is an employment law term that has commonly become known as furlough, I think, but layoff means without pay, apart from a first few initial days where there's a £30 a day payment roughly under some statutory legislation. But there is this ability to be able to lay employees off without pay once the furlough scheme does end or reduces. So it's an option, and you can say to people, it's an opportunity to keep the job open. After a while, if the layoff goes on for a certain length of time, they might have the right to claim redundancy. But we've still got options outside of furlough. This is what we would have used if the government hadn't have introduced the furlough. People might suggest sabbaticals or part-time working, job share, using up some holiday allowance while the business picks up. And then we've got the flexible working as well, so some part-time hours or different ways of working. So there are alternatives to consider. So it's really important to consider all these before making that final decision. Employees exiting the business through redundancy, in order to be entitled to redundancy pay, must have at least 2 years service. And statutory redundancy pay is based on the employee's age and salary and length of service. You can cap this payment at £538 a week. So if the person earns more than that weekly, you can follow the statutory guidelines of 538. If the person earns less, you would pay them just what they earn. In addition to those statutory redundancy payments, people are also entitled to notice pay and accrued holiday pay. But there are ways for some of those to run concurrently. So it's a really good idea to take some professional advice. And employees are entitled to time off to look for new work once redundancy has been confirmed with that individual. So that's redundancy rules. And just finally finishing on how are you? So you as the business leader and owner, don't forget about yourself. So as a business leader and owner, make sure that you're talking, that you're planning, you're taking care of your own mental health, trying to get some exercise, and accessing resources that can support you with the right decisions to help you. So we do have a free coronavirus support hub, which has been running through the HR department throughout the last 12 months. I have put the website address up there, so hrdept.co.coronavirus, and we update it regularly every time the legislation changes. So it's a free resource for anybody that wants to go on and access that. Other resources that will help at this time are some e-learning, which is effective in helping people with remote working, effective resilience training, all of the health and safety, so the display screen equipment training that should be carried out at home. That's all available on e-learning, so people can access that without needing to return to the office. That's me on the webinar today. So if there's any final questions, anybody needs any help, that's my email address to get in touch and my phone number.
Thank you, Sarah. Like I said, if anyone's got any questions, please, do put it in the chat box or the comments. More than happy to do them now. I kind of, a couple of the things I'm going to ask you actually, Sarah, just generally speaking, you mentioned about redundancies there. I guess there's no right or wrong answer to this, but do you think at the moment we've kind of only really seen the tip of the iceberg about what potentially could happen? And there's a lot of obviously essentially artificial propping up of businesses in the moment, whether it's furlough or other schemes. Do potentially we see that the redundancies might kick in later in this year or even into next year? We kind of see the worst of that, unfortunately.
Sadly, yes, unfortunately. There was a couple of phases of redundancy last year when companies thought the furlough was coming to an end the first time, and then when it was coming to an end the second time on the 31st of October. And no doubt, as we start to see the changes in furlough contributions, if businesses are realising that they have had changes as a result of COVID, then we will see more redundancies, sadly. and there has been some propping up in the hospitality leisure. I was speaking to one of my colleagues in HR, and they were talking about, they thought a furlough would end on the 21st of June when the roadmap indicates that lockdown will be over if everything goes to plan. I always said it would continue till September, because it would have been unfair on the hospitality sector to have expected them to return to 100% straight away. So we're not all going to go rushing back out to book restaurants and to go to hospitality venues, and there's still lots of events industries that are not going to be full swing straight away. So we're going to see kind of a drip depending on the industry and the sector. As with all situations, we compare it to a recession, don't we? We don't like to use that word, but different industries are affected in different ways, and we're still going to see a trickle right through to the end of the year, and sadly into the beginning of next year. I do agree with you there, Michael.
Absolutely. The other question I'm going to ask actually is around, which is a slightly controversial subject, I guess, is around vaccines, in terms of what businesses might be requiring or asking their employees to do. Obviously, there's some industries where it's probably more relevant, whether, you know, in care homes and things like that, but kind of just generally speaking, what do you think, how do you think that will play out with businesses?
So lots of thoughts on vaccines being shared in the legal world at the moment. There's some very basics, which are that people are protected for their own individual rights and for their own individual views and beliefs. So this is going to get tested in legislation at some point, and so I'll give you the proper answer in about 2 or 3 years' time when there's been a few case laws on it. But at the moment, we must tread carefully. So if you're in an environment like yours, Michael, or it's an office-based role, no, you can't insist on somebody having the vaccine. It's just unthinkable, because you can do social distancing, and you can also flex people working at home, reduce capacity. So if somebody said to you, I don't want the vaccine, it would be really difficult for you to enforce that. We've had clients at the HR department that are care homes, where their patients are starting to say, and their patient's family, I will remove my dad, mum from this care home if you don't prove to me that all of your care workers have had taken the vaccine. So if we can start to prove legitimate grounds for why we're asking people to take the vaccine, then we've got more chance of being able to defend our position. So it's going to be sector specific. People that don't want it because of religious beliefs, they will have certain protections if there are certain religions. But I do know that some of the, you know, the big religious faiths have gone out there and said, we've got no objection to people taking the vaccines. They're trying to kind of help business industry with that. So yeah, it's going to be very individual. It's going to be very industry specific. There's actually some medical legislation that I was reading up in the background when I was being asked these questions. There's a medical act that says you can't make people take medical treatment, and to some extent it's a medical, well, it is a medical treatment, isn't it?
Well, I guess there's a degree of as well, is you're not having been able to get that information. If the employee doesn't want to tell you if they've had it or not, there's going to be that element, isn't there, I would imagine? Yeah,
there's data protection, GDPR. But if you are a care home and maybe you only employ 6 employees and 3 of them are saying they won't take it, and 50% of your patients are threatening to be withdrawn, regardless of everything I've just listed under discrimination legislation and beliefs, you would probably have grounds for a legitimate business reason to then dismiss the employees, because otherwise your business wouldn't exist anymore. But if you're a care home with 1,000 employees and you've got 3, you might be able to put them in kitchen duties or different duties. So it is really individual and very industry specific. But if you wanted a really short answer, no, you can't tell people to have the vaccine.
No, I think it'd be an interesting thing that will come in the next few years, won't it? That will kind of, it'll be, like you said, I think there's certain industries where it's probably more likely to happen than others. But thank you for that, Sarah. And we've had some great comments and people saying thank you. And I've seen there, Stuart has mentioned he completely agrees with you around the kind of events and leisure industry in terms of the furlough scheme and how it'll be drip back. And that's an industry that Stuart works in. So yeah, thank you for that, Sarah. No, it's been really, really useful. For any of the guys out, I will be downloading this video and I'll be putting it onto the YouTube channel and onto Sarah's page on the website as well. So if you want to go back and watch any parts of it, you'll be able to do so. And obviously Sarah's is there as well to contact you if needed. So thank you everyone for for watching, and obviously thank you, Sarah, for your time and some really, really useful information there. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Cheers, Sarah. Thank you, everyone.